there's a gap between what we were promised about robotics and like what the reality is. And I think I feel very responsible for that gap. And everything that I've done is really reflecting that agony that I have, that like there aren't robots everywhere. There's no Rosie the robot in our home yet. And there are very solid, very good reasons for that. And I think the gradient is pointing in the right direction, but I wanted to accelerate that process.
Most robotics demos never ship. Deployed is about the ones that do. This is Deployed, where physical AI gets real. I am extremely excited to have Sid Srinivasa, professor of computer science, robotics at the Paul Allen School of Computing at University of Washington. I'm going to let you talk more about your career in robotics, but obviously led robotics AI with me at Amazon. Look, you've always worked at the intersection of like, how do we bring these models and this robotic capability to the real world? In your research, in how do we help people? How do we help people with feeding, eating? How do we make robotics really useful to people? Obviously in Amazon's systems as well. And so I really want to dig into like, where is physical AI at today? How do we bring these models into the real world? What's getting better? What's still hard? It's enough of kind of my preamble. Maybe let's start though with like your passion for robotics. Where does that emerge from? Like how early did you get excited about robotics and things like that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and spending some more time with you. I know we've spent a lot of time together at Amazon and beyond. I read essays of students who want to be PhD students or undergrads, and they say, when I was 5 years old, I knew I wanted to be a roboticist. Sadly, that's not the case for me. I had a very accidental entry into robotics. My passion was in a few things that all turned out to be useful for building robots. I did a lot of math growing up, typical Indian childhood of a kid who did a lot of math. My father got a computer at home very early on. He was a professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and he used to write code even back in his PhD days. And I used to watch him, do that. And he brought a computer from his office home. And I was about 8, I think, when I started like playing video games in it. And I think very fortunately for me, I decided that I would write my own video game, thinking that I could do it in 2 days. And many, many, many years later, I'm still trying to write that video game. But I think along the way, I learned a lot about writing code. I initially wrote it in GWiz Basic, GW Basic, and then graduated to C, C++. But that really gave me this love for writing code. I think of code as poetry. I'm not very artistic, but it's one of the few ways in which I can express myself. I was also pretty handy with my hands. My grandfather owned a small auto factory, and I used to go and grease ball bearings at his auto factory, and he would show me how to take apart cars and put them back together. So without my knowledge, I was actually assembling all the tools that are needed for a competent roboticist. I did an internship at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where I worked on fluid dynamics. I actually wrote a journal paper, which is one of my most cited journal papers even today on using wavelets and stuff like that. And so I was all set to do a PhD in applied math at Caltech when Raj Reddy, who had started this very obscure little thing called the Robotics Institute at this very obscure little university called Carnegie Mellon back in 1999. He came and he gave a talk at IIT Madras, and my dad, because he was a dean then, invited him over home. And Raj took one look at me and was like, "Why aren't you applying to the Robotics Institute? Right? We have a PhD program." And I told him, I have never seen a robot in my life. Not a single robot. And I don't know anything about robots. And he said, "Doesn't matter." Right? And he was like, "I am leaving on a plane, in 2 days. And I want you to give me your package." Because back then we had to mail in our academic packages. There was no email or anything. So I did that, and lo and behold, I got into the Robotics Institute. I don't know how. I literally wrote in my essay that I've never seen a robot in my life, but here are all the skills that I have that I think can be useful. And then there was a big tussle with my dad, of course. I remember him, "Dad, if you're listening, I'm sorry about that." He pulled me aside and he was like, "Sid, you know what the future is? It's not robots, it's turbines. Turbines are the future. And so you should go to Caltech, go do applied math, and then do fluid mechanics. You have your career, it's all set." And I was like, Maybe not. And so that's how I got into robotics. I wish I could give you a better story on that. But I got into CMU at an incredibly fertile time for robotics. Everything was happening then. This is the late 90s. And, we were doing Grand Challenge, Urban Challenge, inventing algorithms to solve POMDPs, like the early learning methods. We were so immersed in it that we didn't know that we were inventing things that would be used by so many people, right? My stuff now runs on the Mars rover and the Robonaut. And back when we were inventing it, we were like, that's kind of fun. Wouldn't it be cool? So I think, I wish I could really go back to that time. That was one of the most, it was just magic in a bottle. And we were in this building called Smith Hall, and it was just the students. And I wrote so many papers with all my colleagues and friends, and it was just magical.
It's funny, we've never actually really talked about how we got into computer. Because my dad was also a professor, and he also brought home a computer early, and I also picked up GW Basic and tried to build a game. And I tried to recreate Super Mario Brothers. And GW Basic had this side-scrolling vector graphics library, and I remember trying to figure out how to do bounding box collision detection, and I didn't have any of the algorithmic books. But interestingly, that's what got me into 3D graphics, which got me into the graphics lab at LCS at MIT, doing undergraduate research with Seth Telek. We crossed paths when I sought you out to hire you for Amazon. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what was compelling about the Amazon opportunity? What convinced you? I know what I was trying to say to convince you to join, but what convinced you to come join Amazon?
Yeah, I remember our first meeting, very, very fondly. And so I'm a very reluctant academic in some ways. I love being a professor. I love teaching. I love inventing new things. I love not having a boss. but I think part of me also really wants to go put robots out there in the world. And a lot of, you also approached me at a very, very interesting time in my life, in that I started Berkshire Grey. We had a very unique thesis on how we wanted to solve fulfillment. And it worked, a bunch of very happy accidents, and it's all happy path. It worked really well. We made some of our VCs a lot of money, and that was great. Every interaction I had with a customer at Berkshire Grey, we would only be shown a small sliver. They would open the door just enough for us to be able to be useful to them. And I really wanted to yank the door open completely and get access to everything, because I knew that the more data and the more information we had, the better we would be able to build our system. And I didn't want to just be optimizing some subset of it. I wanted to have access to everything. I think when the opportunity came along at Amazon, I think there were two things that were really appealing, of course. One is the ability to impact Amazon's stock price with the work that we do, right? I remember telling you this also, I didn't want to be a jewel for someone, right? To say hey, do some cool stuff, and hey, Sid's here too. I wanted to be able to do work that would move the stock price meaningfully, and we did. And I think the second one was that I really wanted to have visibility and access to everything. And I think that is something that we completely forget. That was the beauty of Amazon, is that you actually had access to whatever you wanted, right? It was not easy to get it, and it wasn't always instrumented. But if you had the will to actually go and find it, then you could really optimize everything. And I think the two of those things, when combined together, produce changes and produce breakthroughs that are just not possible in many other places.
Well, I think about if you want to bring robotics to the world, right, and you want to use your capabilities technologically in AI and systems, you have to start by studying the work, right? What is the work? And the beauty of Amazon is, at least from a logistics standpoint, there was a lot of work, right? And a lot of work to go study, and a wide surface area to say, how could we bring automation to these various different applications? Maybe we'll get back to Amazon, but you also have a passion for how robotics can help in the home, in assistive care. We've talked recently, that work still is incredibly rewarding for you. And so tell me more about like where that energy comes from?
I think it's incredibly important for us to build robots and AI systems that can care for those who are in need of care. And a lot of this, for me, the genesis came from visiting the Rehab Institute of Chicago. Now it's called the Ability Lab. Back in 2010, I was visiting one of my friends. I gave a talk there, and then she walked me around the actual Rehab Institute, which is one of the beauties of that particular place, is that you can have academics seated right next to the OTs and the PTs and the doctors who are working with real users. It gives you a lot of centering and balance. And I was just talking to them, and I remember this conversation. It was with a young girl. She had an upper I think C2, C3 high spinal cord injury, and as you know, the higher up you go in the spinal cord, the more challenging it is. And I was just amazed by her energy to want to make a change in the world, right? And so I asked her, what should I do? How can I help you? And it's also, the motivation is very simple, right? We both have kids, and if anything like that ever happened to my children, I would give up everything that I'm doing and spend the rest of my life with them, right? No questions, no doubt. And then the question is, why can't we do it for someone else's child, right? What is it about someone else's child that's different? And I remember her telling me that, I want to live myself. I want to be independent. I want to have more dignity. And she said, I just want a robot that can help me feed myself. On a whim, on that day, I was like, okay, I'll go build that robot, right? And I also told her one thing that, in my own hubris, I said, I'll build this robot. You just put a plate full of food and it'll just feed you all the time. And she said, I don't want that. She was telling me this thing that, all my life now, somebody else is always doing things for me, making me, I don't want another thing that's telling me what to do. I want this to be my robot, right? I want this to be something that I can work with, I can customize. And I took that to heart, right? We're not building these systems to be yet another thing that orders you around. We're building these systems so that they can work meaningfully with you and interact with you. And so that really sort of started off. I came back from there. As a true academic, I wrote an NIH grant and an NSF grant. I got an R01, and we started working on this problem. And it ended up being incredibly rewarding because it's an incredibly challenging physical manipulation problem. We have a robot now that can twirl spaghetti, cut chicken, pick up sushi. That's deformable objects. What is state? What is a byte? How do you pick up a byte? And it's an incredibly challenging and rewarding human-robot interaction problem, right? It is the most complicated handover that we do in our life. We're handing over this food that's on a fork or something that's delicately balanced into someone's mouth. And so it was
truly collaborative, right?
And truly, exactly, truly collaborating and truly social, right? Mm-hmm. We almost always eat with and around other people, right? And when we do that, there's this social dance. And we did a lot of studies on when do people eat? What are the social cues in which you eat, right? And when do you stop? When do you not stop? Because you don't want a robot that's in the Charlie Chaplin movies, mechanically just shoveling food into your mouth, right? And I think feeding is one of those things that we spend our growing lives wanting to not be fed, right? We want to eat ourselves. And to go back into that state where someone else has to feed you, that can be very disempowering, right? There's a story that Christopher Reeve, who was Superman, was never seen at a restaurant after his high spinal cord injury. And it's because he didn't want anyone to see Superman being fed. And so it's there's so much involved with feeding, which goes beyond getting calories into our body, right? It's our way to say that I can take care of myself. It's our way to express how we want to interact with other people. Having a meal with someone is still, right, one of the ways in which you show that I care about you and I want to spend this time with you. I think being cut off from that is so disempowering, and anything that we can do to empower people to live with dignity would be so amazing.
And when we find this everywhere with which is people want to view the robot as a collaborative agent, as a tool, as a part of what they're trying to get done versus as something like a train that just goes by, right? And whenever we bring robots into the real world, right, and interact, there's surprises. Were there interesting deployment challenges, tricks, hard problems that you weren't expecting that you had to work around?
One of my PhD students, Amal, when he graduated, actually when he proposed this thesis, he said, in the end, I'm going to have our feeding robot feed someone in their home for an entire week. right? And I was like, well, this is a big swing you're taking, my friend. and I was like, yeah, I can do it, right? And we did it, right? And then that was pretty incredible that he actually like not only wrote the algorithms but also deployed them in a way that would be successful. I know my student Laura Erlon back in like 2012 or 13, we would detect items on a scene by ourselves. Back then, that was actually a hard problem, which is no longer now, thanks to Sam and Sam 2 and all of those things. And it would feed her, right? And we had, I think it was NPR that was videotaping us, and they'd come in, and we were like, I love doing demos, whether they work or not. And so we got this Asian chicken with broccoli in a bowl and like placed it in front of Laura. And Laura was like, yeah, like roll the cameras. Like I'm comfortable. And picked up the broccoli, fed her, and she chewed it and chewed it and chewed it and chewed it. So, and then I picked up another broccoli and fed her. And it just kept picking one broccoli after another. So by the end of it did not pick a single chicken piece. I don't know why, but I think she was like, this is more greens than like I've ever had in my life. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know why it did that, but it did that. But I think it also reflects, feeding is actually not just the act of picking up food and putting it in your mouth. It's like a Markov decision process, right? Like every bite like influences both the state of the plate or the bowl, but also influences what we want to eat next, right? Like we're not always like eating all the broccoli first and then all the chicken.
Right.
Like there is a cadence to it. I mean, salad is actually one of the most interesting problems, right? Because we construct the most artisanal bite from like, I'm going to take one lettuce, half a tomato, this little raisin here, this other thing, put it all together. I think the lettuce goes at the bottom because I want to feel the crunch. It's a multi-step process that you need to think about. And I think those are the simple acts that we do that are actually incredibly complicated and incredibly subtle that need to be captured. And I think that's the other thing is that our users use these robots not just for feeding themselves, but also for everything else, right? And so we need to actually integrate with their system, right? Like this is one of the common problems that we have with robots is that like someone brings a robot and says, now you need to learn a whole new way of like doing things. That can work sometimes, right? Like I don't think that that's out of scope, but more often than not, you want to meet in the middle, right? Like you want to understand like what is the wheelchair OS that you're using? How do I integrate with that? Are you using a head mounted joystick, a sip and puff? Like what are you actually using that I can work with rather than telling you you can only interact with it with voice, right? Maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe their mouth is full of food that they're chewing that they can't actually talk. Or maybe they're in a social conversation and they don't want to pause and say, hey, robot, feed me my next bite. So there's just so much nuance to it that I think we need to work through that we're all incredibly surprising. I mean, like coming up with the theory and the algorithms was just only like, 30% of the way, right? Like the other 70%, even for a week-long, purely academic deployment, right? It's still so much of it is about like understanding the user, understanding the work, like you said, and like truly meaningfully connecting with it in a way that you are not just shooting a YouTube video for like 30 seconds, but like actually bringing value to the customer. Right.
At Tell Me Networks, we worked on speech recognition and voice automation and automated call center. Today was the first time where I called up Hertz because my rental car wasn't ready for some reason at SeaTac, and I talked to full AI, right? And it was pretty fascinating because it kind of subtly blamed the fact that I couldn't get my car and I had to go to the desk on like airport rules, like that shifted all the responsibility to the airport authority for some reason. But obviously in like robotics, the thing many of us are aiming for in physical AI is this like open world prompting where you can just talk and say, no, please, not another piece of broccoli. Like I'd love to have chicken now, and the robot will adapt and understand that. And there are a bunch of theories as to how we're going to get there. We're going to build a full world model that can understand the whole universe and maybe powered by a massive AI factory, token generation, right? You and I have talked about the gaps that we both still see in this space. For the podcast audience who maybe is not as deeply versed in VLAs and evals, and I mean, I remember asking someone once, we throw out this term inference all the time. How many people actually know what inference is? So I'll ask you maybe to go into professorial mode a little bit and kind of help explain some of these basics and why why it's still a challenge, and maybe what you're excited about.
Any task that we have has some fraction of common sense knowledge and some fraction of specialization. What do I mean by that? Like common sense knowledge is like if you pull somebody off of the street, the average human, and plunk them in front of your system or your problem and say, what should I do? Right? I want to pick up a coffee mug. Like, what should I do? And like, sure enough, they could like say, oh, you want to pick it up by the side, like not by the handle, see if it's hot, lift it up, give it to somebody. Some other tasks have a little bit less, like driving, for example. Right? There are a lot of backseat drivers. We've also been backseat drivers in our lives. You can, in general, say a few things, but like not always. I think there are other tasks where there's very little common sense knowledge. Plonk a person from the street in front of a heart surgeon, say, oh, what should I cut next? Right? That's going to be rough, right? You probably don't want to trust that person. So I think that statement one is that any task has some fraction of common sense and some fraction of specialization. The value of what we have demonstrated until now is that we can use off-domain data, which is like internet scale data that's available, common sense knowledge that's available, encyclopedias, all of that, to take a fairly significant whack at the common sense part of any task. Certainly in the visual space, right? We can say, like, tell me what's in this image, and like, sure enough, we can do semantic segmentation, we can label pixels in the image, and that's great because in the worlds that we are familiar with. The language space, right? We have lots of language data, and we can combine that together with the vision and get a visual language model. And so I guess the one way to think about all of these models that exist that sort of use internet scale data to pre-train is that they take a significant whack at the common sense aspect of it. And I think that like our ability to train these models, our ability to build these models is almost commodity now, right? Like we all know the architectures, we all know how to do it. There's like subtle nuances about it. I am also, like you, constantly bemused when people ask me this question around like, but isn't this better? I'm like, how? Like, how can it be better, right? And of course, like I want to appreciate the fact that like there are some ways in which like you can use unsupervised data much more efficiently than others. But I think like that's one statement that we need to align on, which is the fact that like there's only so many Shannon bits available. Gotta eat them, you know, in some way. So I think like there's two things here, right? Like one is that any task has common sense and specificity, and that we're able to eat to the common sense part like much better now. Because
we're taking massive amounts of data and extracting information, extracting Shannon bits with these model building tools.
Exactly.
And by doing that, the common stuff is easier to learn than the specialized stuff.
100%. Right? Exactly. Right. Like I think that's very well put, which is that like now we can start with a baseline that is so much better than what we had many years ago, right? Which is great for robotics because now we don't have to go about like starting from scratch. We can start at the tip of the spear rather than at the base of the spear. And when you couple that with all the hardware advances, as well as the fact that electric motors have gotten so much better, now we can actually build like actual physical embodied systems at a fraction of the cost that it used to cost. Like back in the day, one of the biggest challenges with building a humanoid robot is actually the ankle torques. Like, what is the motor that you can put at the ankle that can actually generate sufficient torques to be able to make you walk in a way that's not a ZMP walk, which is the sort of like, if you remember like Honda Ashimo and all of these other robots, they had this sort of crab walk that they would do. Is largely because like their ankles were like miserably weak. And so they couldn't actually like lift off of the ankle. And so they sort of stepped around like how you walk on ice. That's the reason why you walk on ice in a funny way, because like you feel like the perturbation at your ankles as you slip is going to be significant, and you don't want to put load on your ankles. The bigger muscles are elsewhere. But now, you know, if you look at some of the humanoid robots that are out there now, they all have like electric motors and they can do backflips because just the power density that we're able to stick into an electric motor at the ankle. Like whenever you see a humanoid robot, always look at its ankles because that's where all the magic actually sits, because that's the most power that is actually needed at the density that they have. So I think when you combine the fact that we have sort of commoditized common sense knowledge, we have commoditized some of these like pre-trained models, as well as the fact that robots are orders of magnitude cheaper than they ever used to be. But I would say that like a lot of my focus is really on the other part, right? Which is, how can you be data efficient in the part where you don't have common sense? And so for me, I think that like many interesting tasks are data scarce, right? Like we have lots and lots of data of like people picking up coffee mugs and putting them down, not as much data of heart surgery. And there's a very simple economic argument to it, right? Like getting a teleoperator to teleoperate picking up a coffee mug is like orders of magnitude cheaper than like getting somebody to like do heart surgery. And so I think that like a lot of the future is really in, at least for me, at least on the academic side, I've been focusing on like, well, how do we crack this puzzle of being data efficient while we're still doing learning? And again, like there is no free lunch, which means that either you need to make specific assumptions. So for example, we have some papers on assuming that the dynamics are locally Lipschitz, and then what is the algorithm that comes out of that, right? Like, or we need to think about other ways in which we can interact with the world, right? Like, can we do our reinforcement learning safely, data efficiently? Can we leverage expert information in a way that's not just getting them to give us a whole bunch of demonstrations? I can go on how inefficient that is as much as you'd like. Like most of my time at Cruise and most of our time at Cruise was not spent on the nominal, right? Like over 90% of driving is boring, but it's the other 10% that's crucial. And that's the long tail that we're trying to crack. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that like, I mean, there are many tasks where the long tail can be engineered away or the long tail is unnecessary. But like most like tasks that have a high, TAM, like require us to like think through what those long tail scenarios are. And it's very easy to generate a long-tailed driving scenario, which is there's a giraffe on a spacecraft that's landing in front of you, right? But you don't want that because the likelihood of that happening is like 0, right? And so when we say long tail, we actually mean this like Goldilocks zone of like, it can kind of happen, but it doesn't happen enough that like we have data about it. Right. And even being able to be precise about that and mathematically concise about that is hard, right? So I think that's, we've written a bunch of ICML papers on this of like, how do you actually think about, how do you even define like what your epistemic uncertainty is and like what the correct long tail is?
How do you think though about this notion of special purpose robots versus general purpose robots? And is the only general purpose form factor a humanoid? Like, how do you answer that question? I'm sure you get it plenty.
I think I appreciate all those who are working on humanoids. I see the value of being able to retarget human data, whether it's like mocap data or egocentric data to a human form factor. I also appreciate that people are thinking about building dexterous hands because retargeting from like human hands to like other hands is complicated. I think the other argument that people make is that human worlds are designed for humans, the affordances are like that, all of that. I think all of those are shortcuts that hide like true structure. And I can give you the mathematical argument and I can give you the societal argument. I can give you the societal argument first is that like we say we want to build humanoid robots because factories or fulfillment centers are built for humans and we got to go. Like my response to that is that like we should build more accessible factories, more accessible environments so that people in wheelchairs can actually go and like be successful in these environments. And oh, by the way, that can greatly benefit robots as well. I mean, you've seen this example of curb cuts, right? Mm-hmm. We legislated curb cuts so that it would be easier for those who are moving across these, whether it's a stroller or whether it's somebody in a wheelchair. And that's hugely beneficial for sidewalk robots.
Yes.
Because sidewalk robots now don't need to have complicated rocker bogie mechanisms. So I think that like part of me when I see this, like, oh, we'll build humanoid robots can climb stairs and like wheel robots can't. I'm just like, well, like this is an accessibility problem that we as humans need to address because like what if there's a human who can't really climb stairs, right? So I think that the argument is a little weak around like we need to have humanoid robots because the world is only designed for humans. I think the technical argument is also that, and I say this in a very mathematical way, not in a philosophical way, we humans are a local minimum in evolution, right? We just so happen to have 2 arms, 5 fingers on each hand. There's nothing like, I apologize to all those who don't believe in that. But evolutionary, we're just like a local minimum, right? It's a very complicated, non-convex, non-linear landscape. and we just so happen today to land in it. You catch us 500,000 years from now, we'll be in some other place, right? So I think that there's nothing sacrosanct about having 5 fingers. There's nothing sacrosanct about having a bimanual arm. And as roboticists, we have the opportunity to be liberated from that local minimum. We can build whatever we want.
Right.
We can build a thing that actually works, right? Even in worlds that are designed for us, there are other entities that can be way more efficient than us, right? Like, boy, I wish I could have a third arm. Every day, there is at least like 100 times where I'm like, oh, if only I had another arm, right? So even in our own lives, like our bimanual ability is an inadequacy, right? We spend most of our lives using tools, right? And what do those tools do? Those tools are actually specialized end effectors that help us like solve a problem. And yes, we have dexterous control over them, but that's like 6 degrees of freedom control that we could get from other means as well. And I think that there is a fallacy that says that like once you build the humanoid robot, all the algorithms become trivial. And again, I would like to go back to the same Shannon argument that I made before. It's not like suddenly like the entropy went away, right? Like the problem is still fundamentally hard, right? Like whatever you want to do. So I think if you build a humanoid robot, then suddenly all of AI will become easy, is an argument that again has significant weaknesses, right?
For better or worse, we see this on the battlefront in Ukraine, right? That would you rather be a human form factor moving across the landscape, or would you rather be a drone, right, flying through the air? And humans are at a substantial disadvantage, and a humanoid robot would be at a substantial disadvantage relative to a fast-flying drone, right?
Yeah.
And
it's funny, I was also just thinking about like all of our Indian gods have non-humanoid form. They have like 9 heads or wings, or they fly. So look, all of our aspirations are about a non-humanoid form.
roboticists have been working on humanoids for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, like the chimp robot that we built for the DARPA Grand Challenge was not a humanoid in the traditional sense. It was like a humanoid in the Indian god sense, in that it also had tank treads on its forearms. So it could not only walk, but it could also that's why it was called chimp, that it would go on all 4s and it would be a tank that would just roll, right? And it was pretty cool. And so it could lift up and manipulate, or it could just go down and be like, I'm just going to be a tank that's going to roll on the ground, because it's just so much more like robust to actually roll with like four-point contact rather than like try to balance with the bimanual form. I mean, I think this is the other challenge with humanoids, is that like any entity that spends like over 80% of its energy not falling is like something that you should think about like not using, right? And that's it's amusing, right? Like even from an energetic point of view, that like having a tripod or a quadruped like stance means that you're statically stable, right? So you don't have to spend energy to be stable. Whereas with the humanoid, you turn off the brakes, you turn off the motors, and you don't have brakes, and it just collapses, which is a very dangerous local minimum to be in, right? Like, do you want that to be around your kids, so that when it collapses, it just like crumples on the ground? I am not so sure.
Seth Teller obviously passed away. His wife wrote a book about kind of the final years of his life, and some of the section was dedicated to just the intensity and kind of the amount of stress around that DARPA humanoid challenge. What was your experience with that challenge, and where was some of that stress and pressure coming from?
One of the most amazing things about CMU, and I'm sure many of my friends will agree who grew up during that time, was that it would take PhD students and give them the most absurd things to do, right? Like run the Grand Challenge, run the Urban Challenge. Like, of course, there were professors around it, but we were doing most of the hacking. And I think it was transformative for many of us, right? Like, I think, and many of my friends have gone off to start companies, and it's just like, it's this trial by fire, right? Like, you showed up and you were a roboticist. And that meant that, like, you got to participate in this $1 million challenge. Yeah, go make it happen, right? And it also gave us the confidence that people believed that we could do it, right? Was that a ludicrous thing? Absolutely. The DRC was particularly challenging, also because, you in the track A that we were in, like, you had to build the robot and the algorithms and deploy it and like, there's so many ands, not the ors, right? So it was incredibly frightening. And I think that part of it was also the fact that we had to make, these, at Amazon, we talk about one-way door decisions, right? We had to make several one-way door decisions whose consequences we would know only like way later. If you had the DARPA Robotics Challenge today, it would still be hard, right? It would still be hard, even though like you can buy a humanoid for $20K, you can strap on whatever model you want and all the sensors, right? So this is like, decades later, that problem is still not easy, right? Yeah, I think it would be easier than what it was. And so I think that there was a lot of anxiety. Of course, like there's a lot of press and publicity around it. And of course, like if you're CMU or if you're MIT, you're expected to win it, right? Like anything other than the win. I mean, we did not win it.
Right.
But like anything other than like doing incredibly well was considered a failure. I think one of the things that like really affected us, honestly, I think it still affects me, is that like people pick on the failures, right? Like, I mean, obviously you've seen all of these memes and videos of like a robot falling on its butt and everybody laughs at it. But what they don't show is that like, well, all the other time it was doing incredible things, right? It was entering a Humvee, driving it to a destination, getting out of that Humvee, moving to a bomb defusal area, right? Opening a door, entering that place. There's so many of these faculty talks that I listened to where like they show this video of our robots falling and then they say, oh, we're better than that now, aren't we? And like I sort of like wag my finger and say, like, I'm the one who's was going to make this decision, right? So I think like, note to all future faculty candidates, do not show robot failures that are not your own. And I also think that like, just like with founders, right? Like there's a camaraderie that comes from the fact that like, you're all in it together, right? So I think even though it was a competition, I don't think any of us felt like it was a competition because like some of our best friends were on like the other teams. And so I think there is stress and pressure and there's visibility. I think that the eyes on it and the press and all of that. And I saw that like firsthand at like Grand Challenge and Urban Challenge way before that. Is just that like it can be nerve-wracking, but also at some point you have to take the perspective that like we're doing cool stuff and like what an honor it is to be invited to the dance. And it doesn't work, right? Like we gave it our best. Like I keep telling my kids this, that it's all about the process, not the outcome, right? Like you control the process, you don't control the outcome. But I can imagine what it was like, right? It was tough for all of us. I remember also like, getting drinks with all the others and like the camaraderie that comes from like just blowing steam or like how stupid our robots were. But I think you just gotta like anchor on those like happy moments and not on the sad ones.
Well, no, and I mean, I still think you go back and watch those videos of that challenge, and I mean, I don't think humanoid robots are yet capable of doing the DARPA Grand Challenge, right? And yet we see the opposite too, where sometimes we overexpose the failure videos, sometimes we overexpose the success videos too, right? And it can be very hard to get a real sense for how these systems can
absolutely. I mean,
really,
I think
really work.
As an example, like I don't know if you remember this like Oreo commercial that I made with our robot Herb.
Oh
right?
yes. Tell us the story. This is a great story.
Oreo contacted me and they said they're shooting a set of like shorts of this question of like cookie or cream. Like, apparently, this is a big deal for Americans. When I was young, you just ate it all. You didn't mess with it. But like the question was that, like, do you prefer the cookie or the cream? And they said we wanna come and we wanna shoot a video with you. We're gonna air it in prime time, like on TV. And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? And then they were like, yes, we're coming in 2 weeks. Because this needs to air before the Super Bowl, and like it's got to be done in 2 weeks. I was like, okay, why not? Many Oreos were consumed during those 2 weeks, and the failures were delicious. But essentially, we had a double stack Oreo. I think that's what it's called, but it's like a fat cream. I built this bimanual robot called Herb, two wham arms and a 3-finger hand. And the robot would like pick up an Oreo, and this is all, of course, completely autonomous, and it would pick it up by its fingernails. So a robot hand had fingernails. It would pick it up by its fingernails, and then it would bring it close to it, and then the other hand would also then pick it up by its fingernails. Of course, we were doing like hybrid force position control because the Oreo crumbles, right? And then it would like gently like tease it apart. And then we had to figure out who had the cream, because you pull it in one particular way, all of the cream goes on one of the Oreos and not the other. So, obviously, like we wrote impedance control algorithms that would figure that out. And then it had to scrape the cream on like a little mandolin that was placed there. And then sort of you separated the cookie from the cream, and it had to make a decision. And it was incredible, complicated, dexterous manipulation, planning, control, learning, all of that. And that video was, to this day, I think is hard to beat. and so yeah, it was pretty remarkable. But I think it also goes back to your point of like, I don't want to say like everything was done before, but I think that we forget sometimes that back in the day there were many remarkable things that were done. And of course, even today, there are many remarkable things that are done. And this is, in some ways, the beauty of academia also is that we demolish our gods and build new gods and keep repeating that over and over again. But like in the rubble of the old gods, there's a lot of good stuff.
Well, and I think like robotics is hot right now. But sometimes I see robotics demonstrations where I'm like, that's a pick and place of a part. Even the recent figure demonstration of flipping a package, we had a mechatronic version of that going at 2,200 units per hour consistently, just with a conveyor top, right? So people don't always know actually what's really going on.
Yeah.
In robot, I joke sometimes that Tesla stock would just pop if people showed how much Elon's doing with robots, right? In the factory. Now, there've been robots in automotive factories for 40 years now, right? But I think the public at large hasn't really tuned in. So you were talking about Herb, your robot. I seem to remember a story. So one of my all-time favorite X-Files episode was during the reboot. They presented a fairly dystopian version of the world where AI and robots and drones and our thermostats and our Teslas started to try to manipulate us. But you got to work on that.
I did.
What was that like?
It was exciting. It was remarkable. We also are credited in the movie Where Did You Go, Bernadette? I forget the name of the movie, but we've been on a few movies. Herb has an IMDb page, and so do I. Awesome. It was amazing. You will see a cameo of Herb in there, doing some nefarious things. It was. I think one of the things that we realized when working on both of these, both the movie as well as the show, is that 99% of what they shoot is not on, in the actual episode. So yes, no, it was great. It was wonderful. We always love doing these wacky things. And one of the things that I insist with my students when we do these is that it needs to be autonomous.
Yes.
Whatever they tell you, don't just puppet it. Write code to render it, because that's what helps us also advance, and it's also
right.
Truthful.
Right.
Herb is in there. We're credited in there. I signed a whole bunch of NDAs, so I can't talk too much about it. But I think just the amount of work that the actors put in to even understand our robot, even though they never really, they just whizzed past it. They came, they learned about it, they wanted to know what it could do, what it could not do. I was deeply appreciative of it, because I think that they're certainly method actors, and they really want to understand the space that they're in. That's one of the joys of being an early roboticist, is that people were we've been in a lot of crazy, wacky places, and that was a lot of fun.
Well, just to kind of wrap this up, tell me what you're most maybe bullish about with the attention robotics is getting, and maybe the progress in AI, kind of over the next 5-year horizon. What gets you really excited?
First of all, we have significantly lowered the barrier to entry for robotics. Right? As an educator, I'm super excited about it. Our ability to harness capability, I'd say broadly, has increased tremendously. Right? We can build robots that are more and more capable. I do still believe that data efficiency is going to be more and more important. And I think like that's the place where like I'm spending a lot of my my time on. I also just won a Test of Time award at a conference on some work I did on algorithmic human-robot interaction. So Test of Time award is the award that they give to like an old person right before they retire. So I don't know what that signifies, but it was a paper that we wrote almost over a decade ago about how to think about how robots can work with and around people on legibility and on all of this stuff. And so I do believe that like there is a missing piece, which is like truly understanding interaction in an incredibly meaningful way that is going to help us like not just have the robot that like finds the pixels that are your face, finds the orifice that is your mouth, and shovels the broccoli into that orifice, right? Like we discussed, we know that feeding is much more than that. And that's a piece that I'm incredibly excited about. I think that there's an incredible future there. I also think that like we are getting to a place where we can do safer, more efficient reinforcement learning, right? Which I think is incredibly valuable because of our ability to actually use rewards directly from the world to be able to train models. Certainly for fine-tuning models. So I think like a lot of some of my other academic work, as well as like Abhishek Gupta's, is around like how can we make RL safer and effective. I'm also very much interested in on-policy learning, right? Like how can a robot learn on the fly?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I think we often tend to like amortize learning into simulation and like pre-trained policies, but like how can we actually meaningfully learn on policy instead of like experiencing all futures we can, offline, right? Because that's as we know, like there's an infinite futures, and we want to actually be reactive and responsive. And I think that that's a piece where I think in many ways, like that is going to be a significant unlock for us, like both the ability to interact as well as the ability to do sort of on-policy learning. I think the caution for me is twofold. I think that models that we're building, as well as the papers that we're writing, are less and less interpretable and generalizable, right? Like, why does it not work? We don't know. And maybe this goes back to evaluation, right? Like, how do we know this is a hard task? Why does this, when it fails, why does it fail? Right. And I think like the seduction of closed loop control policies is that they can fail and then they can go back and like succeed. Right? And so as a consequence, one never asks like, well, why did it fail in the first place? Like, what's up with that? Right? And because we see it succeed and we're like, problem solved, right? It's done, right? Then we forget that, like, we forget to ask the question, well, like, it shouldn't fail. Right? It's not like I mean, there are certain tasks where I like fumble around, but like some other tasks, like I just go pick it up, right? So I think our ability to have interpretive models is actually like really, really important. Like, why does it fail? How do I make it not fail in the future? A majority of the papers now in academia, at least in like robot learning, are very much like, I did X, then I did Y, and then look at this artifact that I produced, and like I tweeted it out, so it must be good. And I think we need to again like get out of that local minimum, right? Like I think we have to ask questions that are much more fundamental than that. So I think we're sort of running out of good ideas. And I don't think it's because there aren't that many good ideas, but I think it's because it's easy to publish average ideas, right? This is actually like one of the ways in which I test whether my students have asked, ChatGPT or Claude to help them with their research, is that I listen to the idea and I'm like, it's a good idea, but I would never do it because it is just so average. And so I think that like, one of the values of us as experts is really the ability to produce the high risk, high reward idea, right? Like it's like, that's because that's outside of the data support of the average idea. Like we're not looking for common sense.
That's the zone where we can move the frontier forward.
Exactly, right? Yep. And so I think that like common sense is not what we need when we're advancing research and science. We need like uncommon sense, right? Like we have to be contrarian and correct.
Well, amazing conversation. Keep pushing the limits, Sid. And yeah, thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.